Questions? There we go. Please let myself or one of the presenters know. We have the schedule going for about an hour and a half, but obviously if there's more interest, we would certainly take more questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott and Tom and let them do the rest of the introduction and discussion.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, thanks for coming out today. We really do appreciate it. I'm excited to have kind of different entities here talking about what is a kind of a global issue in some respects, but has a lot of solutions that live kind of on the local level. So my name is Scott Royal. I have a few different roles at the college. Sustainability coordinator is one of the hats I wear, but I also work with students through advising and academic coaching, as well as I teach a little bit. I teach a freshman seminar course, and we have an outdoor education program. So you may also find me back in the woods on our zip line or on our kind of giant swing, fun things like that. But so for today, let me just advance this. So from my perspective, I'm going to really kind of jump back on this question of food waste and composting. As you may know, if you turn on any news source right now, there's some pretty overwhelming news on a lot of fronts. And what I'm finding is with a lot of our students, it was termed eco-anxiety, this idea that we're facing complex global issues and that a lot of our students are feeling somewhat hopeless about what they can do. So on the one hand, we have all this news that comes out that can be pretty overwhelming. On the other hand, what are things we can do as individuals and as a school and on other levels? So this term eco-anxiety was interesting. This recent article showed that relating this to climate. Okay.
Good. Visuals. So somebody's saying visuals. There we go.
All right. Thank you for that. So this was pretty interesting. This was 2018, so I certainly don't think this percentage has gone down. The idea that 70% of US residents are worried about climate change, and out of that, 51% feel completely helpless on the issue. So I think in my role, I've been trying to think about ways that we make that balance between talking about issues that feel like they're really urgent, but also not turning students off in a way that they're just overwhelmed. I mean, our population of students are dealing with, typically they might have another job, they might have family members they're dealing with. And what I'm finding is sometimes when they're presented with this information, they can shut down a little bit. So I think food waste and composting is an amazing opportunity because it connects to these large scale global issues. Specifically, food waste, just the idea of food waste. There's an environmental dimension, there's social impacts, and there's also an economic side. Some people want to hear the dollars and cents, and I think composting and food waste in general kind of covers all of those areas. So I just have a few different quotes that kind of touch upon each of those areas. So the social side is just this idea that nearly 1 billion people are suffering from hunger and malnutrition, and that we throw away tons of food that can be consumed. So I'm not going to come up with the answer for this, but just that idea that we're dealing with a large scale global problem of food insecurity. On a environmental side, and I don't think a lot of the students I talk to really understand the connection between climate change and food waste. So the idea that when 1/3 of our food waste goes into a landfill, it breaks down through, anaerobic means and releases methane which has a huge impact on climate change. So even the idea that throwing away food has an impact on climate change. In addition, I don't know if you're familiar, we have an incinerator in Hudson Falls that a lot of our trash goes to the incinerator. And the idea of that incinerator was that it produced energy as well, and that energy would kind of be used in positive ways. But food waste, does anyone know, what food waste contains a lot of that does not burn very well? Water. So food waste might be 70% water. So if that goes into our incinerator, they not only does it not burn well, they have to add a fuel into the incinerator to make it burn. So the idea of getting energy from that burning is not quite accurate. So that's another area where I think you can connect climate change, food scraps, food waste. And then the economic side of food waste, I think maybe speaks to some people. The idea that the average American, you're losing $1,300 a year on food that doesn't get eaten. So I think that's pretty, it's a pretty good chunk of change. So that's something to really keep in mind. And then you may have seen versions of this, but it's the food waste hierarchy. So the idea that the first thing we want to think about is reducing the food waste in the first place. So that's probably the best place to be, is how do we reduce our food waste from the start? So source reduction. And then after that, are we able to donate food to give it back to individuals who may need it? And then as you can see on here, more of the topic of today is home composting. And that's number 3 on the list for how to deal with food waste. So it's very important and it has a big impact on a lot of different systems. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and he's going to kind of focus in on the New York State, I get this name wrong all the time, but the Food Donation and Food Scrap Recycling Law.
So, hello, my name is Thomas Zalbo, and I'm the Warren County Solid Waste and Recycling Compliance Coordinator. My main job is overseeing like a waste hauler permit system for the county. We're going to implement it in January. So I've been doing a lot of work to get that ready, as well as getting the local solid waste management plan approved. And that is a plan that every county in New York State is required to have. And part of that plan is reducing waste and finding ways, like backyard composting, to reduce the county's overall contribution to the landfill. And a great kind of thing the state is doing, they're very, advocating for composting and banning styrofoam. So it's, definitely helpful. And the new law, it requires generators of 4,000 pounds of food scraps or more per week to make sure that they compost all those food scraps. So it's like very large generators. It's mostly grocery stores, big hotels, or event centers, which we don't have too many locally, but we do have some grocery stores that do make the list. So we are looking at ways where we can add a county composting facility that is up to the commercial scale that can accept that kind of volume. And we're working with a nonprofit to kind of make sure we get that achieved. And I think that mostly covers the food scrap law. Now I guess I'll turn it back to you, or.
So it's going to go over to Karen and Jane. I think your slides are up here in mine too.
Thank you. Let's minimize some things. All right, well, welcome, everybody. I was just telling Karen, this is so neat that we can have, us in person, but also have a virtual option. It's really crazy for everything going on. So, all right, so I don't think I had a chance to introduce myself earlier, but I'm Maren Alexander. I'm the Conservation District Technician at Warren County Soil and Water. I'm going to take my mask off here so you guys can hear me a little bit better. That always helps. So I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about the basics of doing compost at your house, but I'm going to give a little bit of overview on some of the other types of composting. I don't know what this message is and how to get it. Okay. I'm not the most tech savvy person, so.
Let's see if it stops yelling at us now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, all right. And if you guys have any questions along the way, just feel free to stop me, or we can wait till the end and do something more informal. So, all right. So I just here, I wanted to pull a few of the like different definitions that you find about what composting really means. So just a few folks here from, Cornell Cooperative Extension's definition, versus like EPA and the DEC. They're pretty much all along the same lines that you're trying to basically do management of organic material to make a nutrient-rich soil. And there's a lot of different ways we can do this. And I actually learned some things doing this presentation because I mostly have experience in doing backyard composting myself. And not like, I don't really know a lot about these like large scale composting systems, but it's pretty incredible what people have come up with and how this industry has evolved. And it's a really good moneymaker, and it's a really good initiation for communities to be more conscious about their food waste and where they're sending it and what they're doing with it. So first off, I thought I'd talk about vermicomposting, but we actually have an expert here, Bill Richmond, and I'm going to have him talk about vermicomposting instead. So I'll just let him do this slide and can tell you a little bit about it. So I'll take my mask off.
Thanks, Maren. As Maren said, I'm Bill Richmond with Adirondack Worm Farm. We're in Washington County in Hudson Falls, Kingsbury. But vermicomposting, and for the folks that are here, we have a worm bin over at the tables that you can see. Basically, you're using worms to compost material instead of doing it through the traditional hot composting process, which uses microbes. It's the biggest difference, if you will, is that you can do this on an ongoing basis, filling your bin, letting the worms consume the material and create castings, and then putting more food in, more bedding in, that kind of thing. It's not that traditional, you need a certain amount of green, certain amount of brown to combine in that fashion. As it says here, it takes a couple of months to create the castings, which differs. We call it vermicompost or castings. It's basically worm poop. It's different than traditional compost. You use much less of it. It's much higher in nutrient value for the plants. So it's a great alternative to fertilizer. And it's helpful that you can do this in a small setting. If you're in an apartment, or if you are not able to get outside in the winter, or not able to turn a compost pile that needs traditional ways of handling an outdoor backyard compost pile, this is a great alternative. The bin, some people say, well, I don't want worms in my house. I don't want food waste rotting in my house. You can go over and smell our bin. There's no odor. If you're doing it right, you've got bedding in there, you've got worms. There's no odor. They don't make a lot of noise. They're excellent pets. You can go on vacation and leave them alone. You don't need a worm sitter. So there's a lot of benefits in that regard. You can't compost on the same scale with a worm bin, although you can always create another worm bin, or have 2 or 3, or buy a larger scale vermicomposting system and do that. And just briefly, not to spend too much time on this, but really one cool fact that I think always impresses folks: the worms, when they mate, they have a cocoon, is what they lay cocoons, and that's where the babies hatch from. About 3 on average hatch from each cocoon. When you think about worms, and a lot of people don't, but those cocoons, somehow science knows this to be true, but doesn't understand how this happened. If the conditions in which the cocoon is located, in other words, in the bin or out in the wild somewhere, are not conducive to allowing the baby worms to survive, it needs to be the right moisture, the right temperature, the right oxygen level. If those aren't present, the cocoon will go into sort of a stasis and just wait it out. And it will wait for many, many months or a year or more until the conditions improve and then hatch out the babies. Sort of a survival of the species kind of thing. And just a really cool sort of factoid on worms. So that's a very brief overview. Like I say, for the folks that are here, I'm happy to talk more over at the table after the presentation, but that's vermicomposting very briefly in kind of a nutshell.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, this is such a unique way that you can compost. And I actually had experimented with this in high school because my parents didn't want to do like a formal compost bin. They do just leaves and debris and compost, but they're like, you could try that way and keep the worms in the garage and stuff. And it was really fun to learn how to do it. And then we eventually actually got like a tumbler compost for our house. So it was a really good learning opportunity. And I encourage other people to do it who are in smaller households or you have an apartment situation. It's a great alternative. So here is another much larger scale type of composting you might see, or maybe you haven't before, called windrow composting. And basically, you know, it requires a substantial amount of land, heavy equipment, and it's not something you would probably do on your own, but it's more of a community effort to basically get people to start collecting household waste. And some business will run these big compost operations. And pretty much this piece of equipment up here, that'll just turn and aerate that compost pile. So there's also this other form, which is static composting. And pretty much they just pile organic matter with different layers of wood chips and newspaper. And they'll just aerate through these tubes underneath. And this is a really effective method. Some of the drawbacks that I read on it were just that sometimes you can get odors, but they have found that if they just put like fresh compost that they just made on top of the pile, that helps reduce those odors because that air is kind of pushing through. And so it's a lot of experiment with this method as well. But that's more of a large scale composting system you'll see today. This one as well, this is in-vessel composting. What's impressive is that you can get compost in just a few weeks. These systems are super active. It can take grease products, it can take animal byproducts. And basically it creates so much microbial activity in the soil and breaks things down so quickly that they actually have to let this compost sit to have it cool down and kind of balance out. And that was, you know, just a unique method and really effective. So, and then I just wanted to mention, you know, there is the option of not composting, which many households do today. I think we've kind of made a turn towards more people are interested in it. And that's kind of why we're here today, is to get more of our Warren County folks interested, as well as the neighboring counties and residents. But, you know, not composting is always an option, and that's okay. You know, everybody has a different living situation, but there's a lot of alternatives out there. There's businesses that'll come pick up food waste from your house. You know, some communities offer that, some don't. You know, Warren County might eventually go towards doing a system like that. So even though you might not be able to compost physically yourself, you can think about setting up some type of pickup system and doing it that way. I took this picture actually of my kitchen counter one day because I'm a part of a vegetable share. And I just thought it was interesting, you know, like the carrot tops, that's like a substantial amount of carrot, right? Or part of that plant. And so what do you do with that? And I was thinking about just some of the ways I've used them. I'll cook with them. Sometimes I juice them. Sometimes I'll give them to Jim's chickens, who knows? But you know, that's just one of the things you could be putting in your compost. And it's just pretty impressive, like how much food waste you have. But the other reason, you know, we do want to compost is because of those costs we have when we take our trash to landfills. Some people pay a monthly fee for trash pickup or a yearly fee. I do the way out. So the less and less I can bring to the landfill and keep that money in my pocket, the happier I am. Because, you know, 30% of your household food waste is compostable, and that definitely adds up over time. So I don't think the do nothing option is always the best option. So I encourage everybody to take the Joe Dirt approach and to compost. Just try it. You never know. Vermicomposting was nothing I knew about, and it's not that hard. There's so many kits out there, and a lot of it is just experimenting and recognizing, you know, how you can contribute back to the soils and the environment and things like that. So, all right, so let's get into some backyard composting. So this is why I'm up here to talk today, is basically that, you know, I want to encourage you guys that you can do it yourselves if your living conditions can support that. So if you're able to have a backyard composting pile, which is what's pictured in this, you know, I encourage you to do that. A lot of people make them different ways, but it's basically just collecting your household scraps, food scraps and newspapers and different products, and just making your own compost over time. A lot of the items in this picture you probably recognize: banana peels, you even have part of your squash plants. This is actually a picture from a community garden. It has all sorts of stuff, but you know, one thing in my household is I eat about a dozen eggs a week. So that's a really good thing to add to compost. And that's something I could probably improve on by composting. So, all right, so let's get into a little bit more detail as to why else we want to compost. Not only are we reducing the amount we bring to the landfill, you know, we're going to add a significant amount of nutrients back into the soil. Which is very good. We're going to help improve the moisture retention. We're also, you know, we're encouraging beneficial fungi. That's its entire own kingdom. That's very exciting to find different funguses. You know, you don't need to fertilize as much because there's a lot of nutrients when you make compost. You know, and then there's other things you need to think about. By making your own compost, you're keeping things as local as it gets. You're not introducing things into your yard that might not be wanted. This picture down here, this lower picture that says brush, behind that sea of goldenrod, there's actually a huge patch of Japanese knotweed. And it's right next to these two compost piles at a landfill. And so they're just collecting, you know, they're letting stumps and yard waste just sit there. But if you were ever to go and pick up that waste, or the town was to use it somewhere else, who's to say it was properly composted and that they're not going to transfer an invasive plant like Japanese knotweed to your property, your ditch, or another site. So making your own compost can be a really, really good thing, because you know exactly what you're putting into it, and you know exactly what you're going to contribute back into your soils on your property. Another thing, you know, that to know about why you want to keep it local is the fact that, you know, there's a lot of different heavy metals in our soil, and they can be a really good thing, but they also can be a bad thing. And so if you're taking from, let's say, a site that had a lot of industrial activity, and there's lead in the soil, you might not want that compost onto your property. So, that's why, it can be a really good thing to just do this on a small scale at your house and know where your source is coming from. And you're also it's very beneficial to, fungi and all that stuff. So soil's happiness. So a lot of people ask, what is compostable? I like to bring up, this is just a list of a few things. Oops. Sorry, I don't know why that keeps popping up. So these are just a few things, and this is kind of what you're gonna see that you might put in your home composting system. When you look at some of those more larger scale composting systems, they are able to take things like grease and animal byproducts and stuff that you might not be able to. But this is pretty much just like quite a few things like in your house, like my dog sheds a lot. So I should be adding his fur to the compost bin, which I didn't think about. But yeah, just any fruits and vegetables. You can do eggshells. I drink a lot of coffee, so that's a really good thing. Even some of those coffee filters out there are compostable. So there's all sorts of stuff that you can have. This picture I thought was funny. It was from a few weeks ago. Jim and I were out on a highway project, and he just happened to come across a banana peel that easily could have been compostable, but somebody threw it out the side of their door on the highway. So you never know. So tips for success, just, to go over a little bit of the composting basics, and based on, who signed up for this, it sounds like most people have either had experience composting or trying it now. But there are a few of you who don't know a lot about it. But it's a very basic thing if you decide to just do the backyard system. So pretty much first step, you just want to find a space that works for you. So a place where you can just set it aside and say, okay, my structure can go here, or I don't have enough space for doing like a bin type system, so I need to do vermicompost. So you basically just designate a zone that you're like, this is okay to put some of my household waste in, and it's not going to look pretty, but there's a lot of ways to make it look pretty. So these are just a few of the options. You can do just like a stationary composter that just hangs out there. People do the tumbler composters. I've tried those. There's so many different options out there on the market, and people seem to like that because it doesn't require too much effort to have to rotate the bin. You can also get creative. On the right, there's a 3-tiered composter bin. We actually asked one of our town highway departments to build that for one of the local community gardens in the county. And what's nice about that system is the way they turn it is by transferring the compost from one bin to the other. So they just kind of go down in a line. So all the compost that would be on the right solid board bin, the far right, would all be finished compost, and they could just use it at their leisure. And the other 2 bins basically just have removable slats that slide up and down. So when you want to take it all out, you can just remove the slats, and you can easily take a pitchfork or a shovel and shovel that into the next bin. They also put a cover on it just to help limit the amount of rain reaching that compost and kind of having more control over the moisture in the compost bin. But there's a lot of different things you can do. I think the most common thing we see is this picture on the left, which is actually Jim's compost system for his backyard. And I think since he's gotten chickens, you've kind of not had to use this as much, but basically he just put pallets together, because there's always free pallets, it seems like, around. But that's just a really popular way because you get a lot of aeration in there coming in. Your wall's already built. It's not too much expense, and people seem to like that. So that's just a fourth different kind. Okay, so the other thing you need to be thinking about, the second step, is kind of what you're gonna feed your compost basically, or start building your compost. And so collecting food scraps and other items like garden trimmings. So again, this takes us back to our list of what is compostable and what's not. So you're gonna think about, like, if you cut the stem off of the carrot, add that. If you cut, you know, the tomato stem off, you're gonna add that. Anything kind of maybe rotting, forgot about a zucchini or something, as well as a bunch of these other things on this list that you can find around your house. But what you need to start thinking about is kind of this experimental side of making the right carbon to nitrogen ratio for your pile. So kind of the myth is people don't want to start composting because of the odors. Or maybe attracting bears to your property. You know, I think that's oftentimes what I hear. Do you guys have any other reasons why you might haven't composted yet, or concerns? Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yep. So, and that's a great solution, because if that's some, like, maybe you don't want something that's as open as the pallets. But in theory, you know, basically, if you create this right carbon and nitrogen ratio, you're going to reduce your odors. You're going to reduce basically unwanted things happening to your compost. So any, you know, rotting happening, things like that. So yeah, so basically, yep. So you want 30 like nitrogen things. So you want fruits and vegetables, stuff like that. And then you're gonna want a source of carbon, which is gonna be your straw, anything brown paper. I was even reading something that your newspaper actually takes a little bit longer to break down than you might want. Oh, sorry, other way around, sorry. Yeah, so carbon, you want more carbon and less nitrogen. Sorry about that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yep. Okay. I will do that moving forward. So, yeah. So yeah, you need more carbon than you need nitrogen. So figuring out that balance, like that, you might not, your system might not hold as much as you want it to. Like you might have more household food waste than you realize, because maybe you have kids there and you're making much larger meals. So, you know, that's, you know, to deal with that, you might just add another bin or create another pallet area, you know, that you can have a second compost, like the 3-tier bin solution I showed you guys in the earlier slide. That's a great way to compost, you know, a larger amount of like garden scraps and food waste and things like that. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yep. Yes. Right. So I apologize. I misspoke on that. So yeah, basically you want to be collecting things like maybe lawn trimmings, you know, doing straw in there, paper products, stuff like that. And then you'd have 1 part compost, and that, or 1 part like fruits and veggies and eggshells and things like that. But
That's nitrogen.
oh, sorry, that's nitrogen. Yeah, so those are your greens.
If I can just interrupt real quick.
Sure.
So yeah, it's yeah, just think of it as brown and green,
Yeah.
30-1. And if you have a strong odor coming off of the compost bin, you know, it's got that sour smell. That was happening with mine. And I'm not going to sit there and figure it out. I'm going to try. I'm sure Bill has a better idea about it.
Yeah.
But what did I do? I reached down and grabbed 2 handfuls of dried leaves that were around the composter, threw it in there. week 1, week 2, and it balances out.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much more nutrients, and think of it as a weight. You have a lot more weight in the greens and the browns. So you're just trying to balance everything
Yeah.
correctly. So if it's green, it's phosphorus based,
Yeah.
and brown. So
Yeah. So yeah, you just, and a lot of it, when I was talking about like experimenting, it's just seeing, okay, do I have odor? Is it too wet or things like that? And you just kind of add accordingly. So like this is just kind of a rough idea, and it, you should have success with it. And you'll figure out kind of what works for you. But definitely making sure that you don't have too much of those, food scraps or the lawn clippings, and just making sure you're adding some of that brown in will help kind of alleviate some of those things you might be, having trouble with. So the third part aspect is a few different things here. So one, we want to be looking at the moisture content in your compost. So basically, you don't want your compost bin to dry up or get too dry, because basically it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be making compost. So because you need those microorganisms that are breaking things down, they need moisture. A lot of times you can just get that moisture from when you're adding your food scraps, but occasionally you might have to manipulate things with rainwater or just putting a little bit of water in there yourself. But you don't want it too wet, but you just want a nice moisture amount. And again, that's just kind of looking at it by feel and eye and things like, okay, does it smell okay? And, if it looks ridiculously dry, you're probably not making compost. So the other item, you want to be thinking about is also the amount of oxygen. The reason why you're going to get a tumbler bin is because maybe, you can't shovel or use a rake to move things over, and a tumbler bin's a really easy option where you just have a hand crank, and it's like no effort to turn the bin because it can only hold so much, and that just helps aerate the pile. If you do the 3-bin approach, then you're just going to turn it over, use it, and aerate that compost by using a shovel or a pitchfork and transferring it to that next bin. But you just want to make sure there's some airflow in there, because it just allows, basically, it'll have the pile kind of heat up and allow that decomposition to happen at much faster rate, versus if you just let everything sit there, it's going to take forever. So aeration is very important, but also not to over aerate. It just depends, like, on the system that you're using. Oh, sorry, let me repeat the question. So the question was, how often should you aerate the pile? My response is, it just depends on the system you decide to use. So like if you did the 3-bin, you would have, it makes compost in about like 4 to 6 months. So generally the rule of thumb, like I like to go by, is fill that first bin. And once that first bin seems large enough that it's going to be too large, so turn it to the next one. Probably have it sit there for a few weeks and then move it to the second bin. But just, it's also looking at when you want to aerate is like the temperature. So making sure, your compost bin is going to run pretty hot, about like 140 degrees, I want to say, around there. And, you just want to make sure that you're maintaining that temperature throughout. And a lot of that's just by like poking your finger into it, or you can get more specific and get a thermometer. But it just depends what system you get for how often you want to turn that. And then, so that brings us to our last point, is just, you want to optimize that activity happening and that breakdown process happening. So you just want to make sure that you're maintaining that hot temperature. And that also helps like kill any like weed seeds that might be in the compost, things like that, or pathogens. That's very important. So, and then the last item is just time. It's, you know, it's not a time consuming process necessarily, but it's just waiting. So depending on what system you go with, I think most for like the home compost systems, generally it is about that 4 to 6 month waiting period that you can have finished compost. And it just depends how aggressively you want to get at it and scientific or experimental. But I think that's generally a really good rule of thumb, and just, you know, being patient with it. But it will happen and you will succeed. And, you know, once you have a finished product, you'll, you know, everything will be broken down. There's some items that might not break down as quickly as others. Like if you put a corn cob in there, sometimes, you know, you need to cut things up to get it to break down quicker. But those are things you'll figure out along the way of like, what works or what needs more time, what didn't work, what do I need to add more of next time? And just, yeah, that waiting period. So I threw in this fun comic that I think is kind of funny for household people. Yep. So, yeah. All right. So if you guys have any questions, or if you want to wait till the end, that's it that I have for you. And yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Hillary.
So my question is, I've been doing the Tumblr system for a couple of months, and it seems to be working well in like 2 different bins. Doesn't smell, the consistency looks good, but I don't really have a sense of like what the end product should look like. You know, I kind of thought it would be like more crumbly than it is, and I bought a brown lemon using its leaves, and the leaves still look like leaves.
Okay.
So I don't know whether I should start using it in my garden or should just leave it here. What I should expect.
Yeah.
to be like the ideal end product.
Yeah, so that's kind of up to you, I would say. And Jim and Bill can also touch on this. Like, you know, and, you know, I did mention before, you're gonna kind of find like what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe, you know, making the leaves more shredded up in smaller particle sizes could help them break down quicker. But actually Karen brought a finished thing of compost from their property, which is usually what they'll use. If you want to show that, Karen, or we want to pass it around to folks, or if people want to come up and take a look.
Show
Yeah,
and tell.
but that's a great question. Yeah.
It's actually a couple of pieces of plastic in it too.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like with my at-home compost screen, like,
Yep.
so that way you get those sticks and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep. If you want smaller, you know, head sizes, that's a great way to do it. Just break it up yourself. Yep.
And while we're here, we got a good question for you too.
I would just say toward, you know, knowing when to use compost, if you can still see a lot of identifiable material similar to what you put in there, it's probably not ready yet. If you see some, that's okay. There's going to be some stuff, as Maren said, that takes just much longer than a one cycle through to break down. But if you see a lot of things that look just like they did when you put it in, you want to turn it, maybe add a little bit more water and give it more time to go. And then there's a question online. Let's see. If I've buttered my corn, I'm wondering if the buttery cob is okay to the compost bin. I've been putting them in, assuming it's okay. You know, anything that was once alive can be composted. The issue is whether you're going to be attracting pests while it's going through the decomposition process. So, you know, on a commercial scale, you can compost meat and dairy, chicken, you know, fish, all of that stuff. But on a backyard scale, you don't want to be composting those things because your pile isn't going to get hot enough. You know, a lot of things that backyard composters say, well, I want a hot compost pile and it's not getting really hot. It may be that you're doing everything exactly right, but you just don't have the mass. You need basically a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot pile to get enough mass to get that kind of heat. So on the commercial scale, you know, the piles that we're doing are probably, you know, 6 feet high by 8 feet by 8 feet. And, you know, they get up to 150, 160 degrees. And that's why we can compost meat and dairy, because if a pest is going to come through, they're not likely going to smell it anyway, because we cover it with wood chips. But if they did, and they started to dig into the pile, they'd pretty quickly burn their paw, their snout or whatever, and realize this is not a food source for them. But in a backyard pile, you're probably not going to get that heat. So they may say, hey, great food source. There's, you know, there's butter that, you know, is much more attracting than corn. In that middle of the pile, they're going to smell it. Or if you're putting in cheese or you know, the fat from a steak or something like that, it can be composted, but it shouldn't be done in a backyard pile.
All right, let me just check real quick. A bit more, so a bit more, see the panel. Let me check here,
Okay.
Stevie. No, we're not going to. You can either see us or you can see the bottom of the panel or the bottom of the panel or us. So this is just a small camera. Yeah, throw in another chat. Let me know what you're looking for. Want to see us? Okay. Why? I got a mask. So, thank you. Yeah, we're only running one computer here, so I'm just going to be checking questions as we do it. Yeah, and one thing going off of Bill saying was, at least my experience, it's just for the backyarder, the more coarse the material, the larger, the more solid, like wood bark or leaves, in my experience, compost down a much slower as opposed to a tomato. So it's just the mass itself. And yeah, I mean, I think I made the mistake, and you'll make mistakes. So that's first off. I threw in, for some reason, I had bark and I threw it in there. And I had to take a sorter and sort the bark out because like everything else is broken down except for the bark. So, yeah, but that's, I learned it, you know, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but I learned something.
Yeah, and even some people, you know, you'll try to maybe, you know, cut down like your particle sizes and stuff, but you know, what you want to keep in mind if you, you know, shred up those leaves or break up that bark even more is that you're getting enough like space between things so that, you know, that air can kind of transfer through.
What are you doing to shred your leaves?
Anything, I mean, I just shred mine by hand, when I did it in the past. I mean, you could be as creative as you want, but just kind of crumpling them up in your hands or breaking them apart.
The question was, how do you shred the leaves?
Yes.
So crumple them by hand, run them over with a lawnmower and rake them up together. They make these units that fit over garbage cans. I don't really care for them. I've never had them work quite well, but they're little chippers. They fit over the garbage can. You feed the leaves right in there and it fills up the garbage can. So there's multiple ways of doing it. It depends on how much effort you want to put into it. So.
Yeah. So,
Good.
yeah. Does anybody else have any more questions? You want to wait till, okay,
Generally speaking,
sure.
obviously, you have the tops, carrots is one thing, but you have the fiber. Not even cantaloupe, okay, just found it. I'm thinking that probably it would be useful to have some kind of rule of thumb as to how you should break down bigger pieces so that, you know, I mean, that they all hopefully decompose of the same kind. I think we
Yeah.
can say, you know, 2-inch square or something like that. And I know that's a generally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. And again, I think it's just all based on preference, you know, the smaller things. Oh, I will repeat the question. My apologies. I just keep forgetting to do that. Like I said, the Zoom and in person is so different today. So the question was, you know, should you create basically a rule of thumb for your household for breaking larger items down to have them decompose at the same rate as everything else? And, you know, my response for that, you know, and maybe Bill has something else to say, or Jim, but I think it's just based on preference. So, you know, if things are a little bit smaller, they might, you know, they're going to break down quicker likely. So like a cantaloupe or pineapple, I don't remember which one you were talking about, but either way, I would definitely cut that off. But that's just me. But some people just feel it's okay to just add that in, and if it's not, you know, finished at the end, then maybe they'll leave it in there, or, you know, whatever you'd like to do. But yeah, making a rule of thumb, or, you know, setting some kind of guidelines for your household to say, like, I want this in there, or don't add whole fruit, have me cut it up first, or you know, just kind of having a set of rules is always a good thing for what you want in your compost bin, because you might find that leaves aren't your best option, or something wasn't, you know, quite what you wanted in there, or you're putting too much household food waste in your bin and you don't have enough space. That's a big thing people run into, is they just don't have enough space in a single system. Did you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I'll just mention, in many ways, as Maren said, the smaller the better, but as she also mentioned before, you need air spaces. So, you know, you don't want to get so small that's like, I've got so much surface area for the microbes to break this down, but then you've got no air pockets, and they need oxygen as well as the food materials. So, I mean, if you could get things to about, you know, the size of a playing card, you know, that's great, but it's not necessary to go to that extent. And it also depends on what you're talking about. Anything with a shell, you want to make sure at least you've got that broken open into a couple of pieces so that they can get at the softer fruit on the inside. You know, if you put in a small crab apple, let's say, you know, about this size, it's going to take a tremendous amount of time to break down if you don't get that sort of harder outer skin broken up, versus if you took a watermelon and just cut it in half and put it in, the microbes would be able to get to, you know, 95% of that watermelon before they'd really be able to get into that crab apple, because you've broken that protective layer. If you think about it, the way nature sets up fruits and vegetables and things, they have a shell or a skin or something, a rind, to protect them from decomposing too soon and rotting. But you want to make sure that you've, you know, broken into that protective layer if you have something whole that you're putting into your compost, because you want it to rot and not rot, but to decompose and give the microbes a chance to get to it.
So, and I also, you know, just to mention, I would suggest that, you know, I encourage you guys to go visit the Up Yonder table, because they do have some different stages of kind of the composting process, right, Karen? What you guys brought in. So that's always like a good reference to see kind of what things should look like during it. So
one of the comments about that came back from one of the Zoom folks was for shredding, if you have a bagging lawnmower, which makes sense.
yeah,
The only thing I would say then is make sure you're not mowing at the same time, because then you're going to be mixing your greens and your browns.
Yeah.
Get frustrating, I would imagine.
yeah, it's a good point. I don't even own a lawnmower, so I don't even think of those things. All right, so I think we have one more presentation here, and what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So-
First, I apologize to the Zoom land audience. Jim, thank you for being attentive to the chat room. So definitely getting used to multiple formats is a little tricky. But first, I just wanted to, you know, piggyback on what Maren said. There's something so nice about the backyard composting because you know what you're putting in there and you know what you're getting out. From my perspective, on the level of an organization like SUNY Adirondack, it's been pretty interesting as far as what our efforts are to have campus-wide kind of composting. So I'll just bring you through a story that I thought was pretty interesting. So a few years back, our signage on campus for the waste, for the recycling, and we do have some compost on campus, was very inconsistent. So I don't know if you've ever found yourself in front of 3 bins and you're standing there trying to figure out where to put the items. So is it waste? Can it be recycled? Can it be composted? And it's not, the challenge is the answer is different depending on the town you're in, maybe the organization you're at. So I think there's a big educational piece to this that is not an uphill battle, but it really involves a conversation. So my example is we've got these new bins. So we've got a compost bin on the left, we've got our trash bin in the middle, and we've got our recycling on the right side. So our dining facility, years and years ago, we used, silverware and there was someone to wash it and that was great. But somewhere along the ways with the cost of hiring dishwashers and things like that, we converted to just plastic, silverware. And that, does anyone know, can plastic silverware generally be recycled? So, and for us, we use Casella, it cannot be recycled. So that plastic, silverware goes in the trash. So we had a student, so this is the beauty of being at the college, we had a very ambitious student and they really were concerned about the amount of plastic waste. So they were able to get the dining hall to switch to compostable serviceware or silverware. And this relates, I think, to backyard composting as well, because you may have seen on the market, there's a lot of things that tout themselves as being compostable or biodegradable. And as Bill said, anything made from an animal is biodegradable at some level, but does that mean it will biodegrade in your backyard compost or other places like that? So we had a student who was engaged. We got this BPI certified compostable silverware. So the question is, can that go in the recycling? No. Can that go in our compost? No. So we're fortunate on our campus. We have our college farm back here, and we have some dedicated faculty and staff who bring food scraps to our college farm, but we can't put this compostable silverware in our compost bins. And a lot has to do with the heat required for some of these commercially kind of compostable materials. But it just adds, I think, for students and for the general population, there's a little bit of burnout with trying to figure things out. I think people are sometimes like, well, I don't know where it goes. Like, is it compostable? Is it recyclable? Is it not? So it's been an interesting journey for us just to try to, for the education piece. So I think that's kind of something that's important to just point out here. Has anyone encountered any compostable items that they can use in their backyard compost? Does anyone, usually they're typically pretty high heat. And that's a problem. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Our church recently, silverware plates, so.
If it's going to a commercial facility that, go ahead. Oh, sorry, folks in Zoom land. So we had an individual who, for their organization, they moved to compostable kind of plates and silverware. And after what I just said, I think there's a concern that, oh, wait, can this not be put in compost? And the answer is it depends. Do you take it somewhere to a facility, or do you know what happens? Okay. Yeah, so this, and I don't know if anyone here knows about, in this area, commercial facilities that could handle BPI. So Bill, so the worm farm, the Adirondack worm farm can handle that. So that's good to, Good to know, thanks. And then wish cycle, I don't know if you've heard the term, the idea that you throw something in the recycling, you're like, well, it's worth trying, right? In the end, that can cause more harm because it can contaminate the larger streams. But not that I have answers, but I think it's a very interesting conversation, and it's something organizations are dealing with on many levels. So thank you for that question. So just real quick, SUNY Adirondack has a sustainability plan, and we have certain goals that we're trying to reach. One of those is reducing our waste by 25%, and one of them is diverting 25% of our waste from landfills or incineration to either reuse or to compost or things like that. So we're really fortunate. I guess I can take this off for a second. We're really fortunate because we have, I'll come back to that. We have our agricultural business program, and we have a farm out here, and we have some dedicated staff who make it possible. We actually compost our pre-consumer waste in the dining hall. So it's, kitchen scraps, and they're trained to do it. So it's a very clean kind of stream of compost. Our next step is to introduce it to maybe the student side, to have the bins out so people can put their compost in there. The fear is that who knows what's going to end up in that bin, and then who's going to manage that. So our system is probably more closer to backyard composting. So we couldn't handle some of the things something like Bill's Farm does. So we as an organization have to really count on education, from our students and in general. So this is something, hopefully maybe next year, if we meet again, we're going to be further in this journey, but we're just getting to the point, and this was all kind of derailed like everything else with COVID. We were kind of trying to do this last year, but, and we have dedicated faculty, but if they left, we always wonder, like, would this kind of sustain itself? And then real quick, before I pass it on, with this new law, as Tom said, any food generator in New York State that generates 4,000 pounds a week or the 2 tons a week would, and if they're within 25 miles of a facility that can take these kind of organics, would need to do it. Our school, so you can see right here, residential schools with 1,400 students would fall under the 2 tons a week by the DEC's kind of the factor they used. Commuter schools with 5,400 would count. We come in the middle there. We do have a res hall. We do have commuter students, but in the end, we were about 1.3 tons. So it was just interesting even to see where we would fall as an organization. And I think we were trying to use it as an impetus to say, well, it's 2 tons now, but this is something we should be thinking about. And then, yeah, our college farm, it's just past the parking lot, and you can see our compost facility out there. But yeah, does anyone have questions?
Are you considering, let's say, a drop-off program so that people who are commuters can bring their own household?
Yes. So, and that's something, we have a sustainability committee meeting this week. That's something that's even on our agenda, is how can we open it to commuters or folks. And we have Tim Sherbatskoy is our professor here, who's kind of the expert, and he's very much like, we can take it all. Like, so we're trying to figure out how much can we take, and just trying to figure out the details. I think the fear is we don't want to roll something out if it's not something we can kind of maintain.
I know, you're fine. And just something to comment that we ran into, because it's the good intention aspect. Are you now considered some type of commercial business? Because you can recycle up to a certain amount of tires, and then we did a tire program. But if you go over that threshold, then you need to get a permit, and you have a bunch of other things. So that's one thing that I'm sure the college is going to look at is, what level of responsibility do we have here, trying to be a good neighbor and good in the community? So I'm sure all that can get worked out. It's just the details. So.
Thanks. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't want to yammer on for too long, because I think we've got our Park City. Oh, we've got Tom going to talk, and then we've got Park City, Utah. So yeah, if you have questions after, feel free to ask me, but I want to turn it over to Tom, and he's going to talk about kind of events and what that looks like for composting.
Yeah, so I have a good amount of experience with like concerts and music festivals, and it's been very rewarding to be in that line of work, but at the same time, it is very hands-on and very dirty. I would manage a team of like 4 to 8 people, and we had, similar to here, the 3 bins set out. And they're available to attendees to self-sort their waste into compost, recycling, or landfill. And there we placed a big focus on getting towards zero waste. And we found that from like a procurement side of things, all the stuff we're buying and selling at concession stands, it's really about like 60% recycling, 30% compost, and then 10% has to go to landfill. And the 10% is usually like chip bags, bathroom waste, and just odds and ends from operations. So one of like the biggest challenges is sorting the compost. Unlike recycling, there is no facility we can send it to that's going to sort out all of our, if there's someone that puts a beer can in there or chip bags or they get mixed up between the BPI certified fork or spoon with a different plastic spoon. We have to make sure all those contaminants are picked out before our compost hauler would come and pick it up. So it does, it's very costly to do that. But with like the recycling, if there's, certain things in there that aren't recyclable, they can more easily get sorted out so we can accept higher levels of contamination. And I've worked at events in North Carolina and Colorado and California. And it's been very interesting to see the different communities and their understanding, or I guess how much they care about their waste. In California, I had a lot of people, walking around with a trash picker to go, sort beer cans out of the compost, and, people be very appreciative. Colorado and North Carolina had a more centralized experience at one venue. That would come to see heavy on like cups and beer cans and things of that nature. And, we'd find a lot of contamination in the compost. But if we got maybe like an older crowd for like the Willie Nelson shows and things like that, the compost is really great. And it was almost easier to sort the compost than the recycling for those shows. So that was really cool to see, and something I had not really thought about, I guess, from an education standpoint. So that really, kind of goes off what Scott said of, it's a big piece of it is education, and making sure everyone knows why it's important. I think like the BPI certified plastics cost about $50 to $70 more per case. So it is, another thing that costs extra money for either, food truck vendors, college and things like that. So that even more places a bigger need to make sure that it is composted the right way. Does anyone have any questions about events or anything of that nature? All right, I think we can.
All right. Thanks, Tom. So one thing they didn't mention that, a lot of people are familiar with recycling Christmas trees, and we use those in our programs, but Tom was actually talking when we were doing the planning about doing at some point, I wouldn't say this year, but looking at what does everybody do with their old jack-o'-lanterns, and what can you do? A lot of animals will feed on those. Actually, ours don't even go to the composter. They go over for the deer to eat. But, that is something. There's almost anything can get recycled or composted if done properly. That could be something that is pulled out of the waste stream, especially in the more urban environments, Glens Falls, parts of Queensbury, where you're having a more dense population of people and you don't have the availability to get rid of it or don't want to get rid of it because you may be attracting. If Bill doesn't pick up the pumpkins, then, you know, what else can be done? Or maybe there can be a pumpkin truck rolling around, picking them up and going there. You know, there's a lot of things that can occur. So, all right. So our last presenter is Luke Carton, and go ahead and unmute yourself, Luke. Should be good. Let me stop the sharing of this screen.
Yep, and I'll steal it on this side here.
There you go. So go ahead, Luke, and talk a little bit about yourself and your background.
All right, and Jim, can everyone hear me all right? Can you guys hear me on that?
Oh, yeah, you are. It's pretty impressive.
Booming voice. All right, I won't be as loud then. So really quick, my name is Luke Carton. I live in Park City, Utah. I'm the environmental manager for the municipality out here. Quick background on me though, is actually grew up in upstate New York, in Chatham, New York. I'm a ESF grad in a degree program that doesn't actually exist anymore. But I moved out west, graduated college, moved out west, lived out of the back of my truck for about 2 months, and started working in the ski industry. While I was in the ski industry, I ran Vail Resorts environmental sustainability and land planning programs. And then from that, I got moved out to Park City, Utah, and switched over to the governmental side. I also co-founded a group called Mountain Towns 2030. It is it's an accelerant for mountain communities in the West to pursue carbon neutrality. And I'll dive into that here in a second, but really quick, I'll just get rolling with a slideshow here. So my goal is right now, what I'll do is I'll fly through kind of a community perspective on this, and then see what questions you have. I'm sure Jim can help interpret as well. But really quick, the waste side. So like I said, my background, I currently work for the government of Park City, but I also founded this group called Mountain Towns, which is a consortium of over 30 Western mountain communities. Really quick, Park City, Utah, we have North America's most ambitious climate goals to be net zero carbon and 100% renewable electricity 2030 community wide, and just by next year for all city operations. We're doing everything from building a massive solar farm kind of about an hour west of here to we have the nation's highest mileage bus fleet. Park City, Utah is a year-round resident base of about 8,200 residents, but we also have 2 ski resorts and we host Sundance Film Festival. So we actually need the infrastructure to be able to support about 10 times that, and it can get crazy. And everyone thinks, well, it's Park City, Utah, right? It's the hippy dippy bastion, and you're in beautiful Utah, so it's got to be really easy to get things done. But I always do this to put it in perspective. So I'll let everyone quickly ponder, and I usually give away a gift if someone gets it, but we're remote, so I'll just give you a smile. Utah's official state rock. If there's any guesses out there, just think about what you think. You know, we have the beautiful Arches and Zion National Parks, but believe it or not, our official state rock is coal. We are actually one of the most conservative states in the nation. The way our legislature votes, we're second most conservative to Wyoming. So doing sustainability in one of the most conservative states in the nation, a lot of folks view as that's a massive challenge. But the great thing is there's actually some great opportunities, and it goes back to solving your local issues and stripping down the political barriers too. So really quick, I'm just going to fly through a couple kind of high level things that I look at on the community scale of waste diversion and composting. And I'm going to use 2 direct examples to kind of compare and contrast 2 like systems out there. And I've got my contact info at the tail end of this as well. So happy to really fill you in on all these interesting things. The other really neat thing is I'm also a part of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So there's over 350 folks that work in sustainability and municipal governments, from small communities like Park City all the way up to the New York cities in the world. And I've got some pretty great contacts there. So one of the thoughts while the other presenters were talking was the drop-off concept. Falls Church, Virginia did a really cool program where they had just those 95-gallon toters, and they kept them kind of under lock and key, actually under combo and key. And the folks that would be able to drop stuff off at these sites had to pretty much sign away their house and firstborn child of saying, I will comply with all of these things. And if contamination starts to happen, they would just take the bins away. But it was an interesting way to allow folks who are really dedicated to do the pre-consumer food scrap separation, to give them an outlet. And then it was under lock and key. So they kept it really, really kind of well managed and tight. So I could pass on that information. It was a pretty cool way to do a managed drop off site. Really quick though, when we get asked, and we're a community going through this right now. So we just went through a community visioning process. It's called Park City Vision 2020. We wrapped it up the February right before COVID hit, threw everything kind of to chaos, and we're coming out of it. But the interesting thing is zero waste, bubble to the top in our community, is one of the major concerns above affordable housing, transportation, and that side of it. So the easiest way to look at it though, is people always want to, well, we should just become a zero waste community. And my response is, well, we got to see let's see what's in our trash first. So these two pie charts, the one on the left with the bigger part of yellow, that's from our historic downtown. And we actually went out, and there's groups that will go out there and do waste characterization studies for you. And they literally sort through your garbage. I'm going to show you an interesting spreadsheet here in a second. But the one on the left, that is our restaurant and bar waste. So you can see the yellow is the divertible organics that are compostable. So that is both pre and post. So that is everything from chopped up parts of celery stalks to plate scrapings at the end of a meal. And the other thing on the other side of that is the divertibility of residential waste. So they actually went out and went through 11 different 11 different trash trucks to see what was in our residential waste. And as you can see, roughly 45% it was compostable organics. There are still some recyclable containers, glass bottles. In Utah, we don't have a deposit law. And glass can't go in our normal recycling bins. So if you want to recycle glass, you actually need a separate bin. And you still see some of that paper and cardboard in there. But the numbers I have on the bottom here is looking at a community perspective, setting up one of these systems. The 1 to 1,000 or 10,001 is kind of way to view it, right? If I can work with one outlet or one region in our community and get 10,000 pounds of divertible waste, that right there is where we start to really focus our effort. The residential side, our goal is to design the system to really go after these large centers. If you had to ask one person, if you had to change out 10,000 light bulbs, and you could ask one business to change out 10,000 light bulbs, or 10,000 people to change out one light bulb. Sometimes you say, well, let's go after the one business that can do 10,000 first, and then also go after the 10,000 and use their one to help fill in the system as well. So as we're designing our systems out here, we're actually focused mainly on our commercial side, because also our commercial, and that's mostly restaurants and bars, is our largest generator of food waste. But we're also going to integrate our residential side, but it's just the residential side is actually more complex because it's a lot smaller volumes with a lot more accounts. So that's just a little bit more of a juggling act. But that's just, again, something to consider when you're looking at setting up these systems community-wide, is we're actually looking at the kind of the backbone of the system to be our commercial side. Like I said, we have 2 ski resorts. We have 2 different kind of main business districts. We're going to design the system around that, and then use our residential kind of help fill it in as well. Waste characterization study 2. This is the residential breakdown. And you can see a lot of things in there that would actually be hard to compost. This is kind of so you have the mean and you have the MOE, which is just the margin of error. So you can view it as just the wiggle room in there. But this is the level of detail that you can get from one of these waste characterization studies. So if you're interested in pursuing this on a community-wide thing, the first thing I would suggest is go get one of these done. It literally goes down to, you can see 4% of the waste was actually disposable diapers and sanitary products, compared to 0.4% of medically related wastes. They didn't find any asphalt roofing in this, but they, again, you can start seeing the level of detail we have, because now when I start going through the systems and saying, all right, out of these things, what can we divert? Hey, food waste is pretty easy. Re-educating on recycling, that one's pretty easy. But trying to figure out a collection system for dirty diapers is going to be a big challenge. So we're focusing on the major levers right now to pull. So the question is, all right, you got food waste, you got green waste. The quick difference, food waste, pretty easy. Green waste, that term is mostly for yard waste, like tree and bush trimmings, leaves, grass clippings. And in the West out here, we have a lot less, it's less deciduous. Going to ESF and taking dendrology and be able to identify over 200 different trees from bark and bud, and then moving out west where we have like 7 different trees. It's a very different climate out here. So the average home generates a lot less green waste than it does from back east. But there are 2 different major systems out there. I'm just going to run you through the pros and cons. And again, I gave 2 different kind of rough like-sized communities to show you what to look at. So you have the aerobic side, which is the windrow side. Those are the most common that you see. Summit County, Colorado has a great system of this. The interesting thing is one of the reasons they created their commercial composting facility is they also have a mountain pine beetle kill. So they have over 80% of their forests are killed by a mountain pine beetle. You can view it as from mismanagement to climate change to multiple reasons, just in a drought, everything kind of came together and killed a bunch of forests. Then you have the anaerobic system, and I'll use the one that's actually just about 40 miles away from here, Wasatch Resource Recovery. Again, both these are systems that are up and running. I'm just going to run you through the just pros and cons of both the aerobic and anaerobic systems and show you how kind of different communities and what you can do to help solve your own solutions. So really quick, Summit County one is in Summit County, Colorado. It's at the landfill. And the anaerobic one is actually partnered with a wastewater treatment system. And the interesting thing is the map that was shown just a little while ago, you actually have both these systems in New York. So you could actually go take a drive and check them out. The pros of both. So the pros of the aerobic one, this is kind of a key one. It goes back to that carbon nitrogen conversation that Maren was leading with, it can take a higher amount of wood chip and green waste. The other cool thing is, you can see the end product there. It's the black goodness that everyone's used to kind of seeing coming out of a compost bag. And the other interesting thing too is it's actually partnered with, usually a lot of these are partnered with your trash system, or in the West especially they're sometimes co-located with a landfill, and there's advantages and disadvantages to that. But a lot of times you can actually have access, you can share equipment between the 2 systems. The pros of an anaerobic system, though, the ones that are wastewater treatment plants, they can actually handle higher rates of contamination. I'm going to use a quick example here. A grocery store gets a bad batch of fruit, and you'd say, well, that can go in either one. But when you think about it, fruit always has those stinking little stickers on everything. And when I was at the Summit County, Colorado compost facility, you could actually see these little stickers in quite a few spots. The anaerobic one, because it's more of a vat style, they can actually capture all of the waste, and it can actually handle up to about 10% contamination, which is great because that gives you a little bit more flexibility on that side. The other pro of an anaerobic system is it does produce a renewable natural gas. We don't need to get into the carbon accounting of it, but it actually can be considered a carbon negative gas. Some communities will actually turn that directly into renewable electricity. Other ones will actually just put it in the pipeline, and you can actually get different types of carbon credits on this too. And it also needs just a smaller footprint, ground footprint, the anaerobic systems, because it's just the way that handles it. You don't need as much of the bake time and as much of the space. The con side, like I said, the aerobic side, you can't really handle that much contamination, because when you think about it, if a rubber glove goes into an aerobic system, that rubber glove is gonna spit out the back end with that too. It can be time and labor intensive. These are large windrows that you're churning, and you got to keep your carbon to nitrogen balancing right. If it goes out of whack, if it stinks really bad, or if it goes anaerobic, it's still breaking down. It's just smells horrendous. And usually you need a lot of space. Some landfills actually operate on old cap cells. The cons of the anaerobic system are there is a higher capital cost, especially for the co-location side. Like these are expensive large vats, and that's out of your, not just using land. Harder to disrupt. By what I mean by that is if it starts going south, you have to actually shut down more of your system. In an aerobic system, if one of your windrow starts going rotten, you can peel out that part of the windrow. This is much more of a larger kind of harder to start, harder to stop. The co-location side, and like I said, it's a higher tech concept, right? You need more design kind of laid into the front end. And really quick, some last considerations. The aerobic system, the end product side is great. But one of the things that the Summit County, Colorado landfill discovered is people aren't just going to go out of their way to the landfill to pick up a bag of compost. So one of the interesting things that they've done is they've actually partnered with a lot of landscaping firms. Hey, these firms are bringing in, old trees and yard trimmings and all that, and also kind of more carbon heavy stuff. So they actually have a commercial partnership with these landscaping firms that roll in with a dump truck. They can then load with their front end loader the compost side. And the other thing too that I would suggest is if folks are really good at going down this path, don't always work the end product into your financial feasibility, because it can be that you're kind of playing against a different market. And I can go into that more, but the thought would be of view what is the true cost of the operation to get to the end product, and then view the end product as gravy. And again, I can run through the whys of that more if folks are interested. And one last thing I'd suggest too is the Boise model. So City of Boise has a opt-in composting program. And as a part of that program, just baked into the cost, they actually have 2 to 3 times a year, they actually roll in some of these dumpsters full of the compost, and people can roll up and pick up the compost and haul it home. So it's baked into the overall concept and cost of saying, hey, you want to pay into this program, that's great. Your fee goes to all the way through the production, and we actually baked in a little bit of buying it back. So the cool thing is the entire community benefits from that model. The interesting thing about the anaerobic side of it is, and this is a developing side of it, they're becoming more and more scalable. So we're a smaller size community. So a lot of these anaerobic digesters are for much larger facilities, but there are some things out there that are going into the scalability side. So as we ramp this up and as more potential partners come on board, we can actually just add more kind of these tanks. The other cool thing is the anaerobic side can deal with large users, right? Like a great example is a grocery store. There was a grocery store that has entire freezer line go down, and they were able to take all of the meats and all this other stuff and run it through the anaerobic digester. So it can kind of take these large failures and large uses. And the other interesting thing with the anaerobic side is you don't get that kind of beautiful brown or beautiful black kind of soil in a bag. But the end product use can be really useful, except for larger agricultural operations and kind of larger scale, like for us out here, mine restorations and that side of it too. Really quick, some thoughts to consider. Always solve your local and regional problems first. A lot of folks always rely on the federal government or aim for the federal government to solve these things, but really truly say, hey, what's the problem we have in the Warren County, Queensbury area that we're trying to solve? Really well define that. For us out here, our landfill's filling up. So we're actually saying, all right, these are our local issues. We have a landfill, we have a high commercial influx. What kind of system can we have out there? And again, that goes back to the figure out the what. What are you trying to solve first? And then find other communities that are in the same boat. So we're talking to communities in Wyoming. Laramie struggles with a similar issue. And we're going to put our heads together saying, hey, are they ahead of us on this process? Are they behind us with the process, or can we kind of partner and share resources to figure this out? The other joke I always put in there is don't fall in love. There's always folks out there that are promising the coolest, neatest way to solve any of your problems. Don't fall in love with it until you can go try it out. We see this happen all the time in the sustainability world of, hey, we should just go this path totally. And it's like, let's take a step back and make sure we can get it implemented here. And one last thing though, too, is assign value to it. It always drives me crazy that people think recycling should be a zero cost. Food waste should be zero cost. It should be able to support itself under its own weight. Your trash system doesn't. So at least hold those two equal, right? Of saying, hey, it's not just waste, add value to that waste. So I just flew through a bunch of stuff. I love talking fast. And there's my contact information. So I will leave that up. And Jim, what questions, concerns, or what did I blow over too fast?
I can only process half of what you said, Luke.
Perfect. That's my hope. Talk fast.
He is a government employee. No, that was terrific. Are there any questions for Luke you'd like to ask? If you wanted to come up and say it here, or I could repeat it. Those of you on Zoom, if you wanted to ask it directly, if you have the audio, or wanted to put it into a chat. Again, we wanted to look at this presentation as a kind of a local flavor, basically homeowner, and then local small effort, as in like a SUNY Adirondack type community, and then a larger community. A lot of this stuff can be applied in different divisions and areas, so they can be upscaled or downscaled. But does anybody have any questions for Luke specifically? I think you flabbergasted them all, Luke. Oh, we have, yep, Stevie says that was awesome. I agree. So.
Thank you, Stevie.
All right, so you can, if you want, you can stop sharing your screen and we'll just wrap this up then. All right, so what I'd like to offer up is if Bill or up yonder or Cornell wanted to say anything. Thanks for adding in today. That was great. I learned quite a bit just on the side conversations as well. Cooperative Extension, would you like to say anything? Oh, you got to come over here now.
When you said like the.
Keep coming. Yeah, they can't hear you.
Sorry, Zoom people. There was a question in the audience earlier about the scale and what products that we can compost. And there's a really great resource up in the Adirondacks. It's in between Saranac Lake and Lake Placid. John Culpepper, he has started a nonprofit that's called Compost for Good. And prior to starting this nonprofit, there was a grant funded opportunity where he created his own brand new compost system. So we all know what shipping containers look like. It's a shipping container, but inside the shipping container holds the compost system itself. And just a really hopeful example, because I know we were talking about people manning things and staff time. Just a really hopeful example was that high school students in Lake Placid created their own nonprofit on their own. It's a group of juniors. And what they did was they started their own nonprofit so that they could charge the community for dropping off their compost. And then after school, they go and they service the composter every day. They've worked out a schedule, and then they sell the finished product back to the community members. So that's just a really great example of staying local and solving problems in your own community. And also that's a really great resource if you ever need someone to ask about that scalability. I just know he's a really great person, him and his daughter, Katie Culpepper. So I just wanted to share that.
Great. All right, up yonder, anything? You gotta come up here. Going, the end is near here.
I don't really have anything to add. I just wanted to see what it looked like from this point of view. Cornell Cooperative Extension, they have great handouts, and their master gardeners are fantastic. And if you have questions about composting, if you're doing stuff, they're a really good resource. Also online, they have a lot of resources. We can also answer questions. They're good experts. We do have a couple of different composters at Up Yonder. From the backyard compost, we have a turning compost, and we have worm compost. And while some people may not want like a little worm composter, I had one at home, and the tea from it was awesome for houseplants and stuff. So that was really cool. I was going to say that earlier. Oh, and the other thing, somebody was talking about animals. At Up Yonder, we have a backyard composter. Somebody saw a bear 2 weeks ago, and not near our composter. That was my point. On the property, and we have all kinds of animals, but nobody's been bothering our compost. And I think it's just because, and we don't really pay that much attention to the backyard one, but I mean, there's eggshells in there and stuff like that, and nothing's bothering it. So no, that's pretty much it. There you go.
All right, thanks, Karen. And I'll second Karen. We have raccoons and bears on our game cameras behind the house, and Nothing's, the only thing that's ever gotten in there besides the chickens are chipmunks. But yeah, I think if there's another food source, they'll go someplace else because they don't want to deal with stinky stuff all the time. So, all right, well, Maren, unless I forgot something. Oh, another question. Hold on a second. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question for Warren County. I'm wondering, like, are there gonna be like resident open houses or kind of abilities to comment on ideas people might have for countywide or local waste composting systems?
So the question for Thomas is there going to be the availability to comment, publicly comment, or get information on composting systems, drop-offs, and everything else related to that for the communities?
We are working on building out like a solid waste and recycling department page on the county's website. And part of that is going to be a program called a Waste Wizard, where you can like send messages and look up certain recyclable items or composting days like leaf pickups. I can add certain info like that to it. And then I'll also include my contact info on there.
Any other questions? Sorry, we went a little long, but I learned a lot. I mean, and I'm not just saying that, it's very interesting. Let's see, let me check the chat here. I see 2 chats. I just started using a really big, cardboard box for composting leaves, lake weeds, making fertilizer. Yep. In our office, a lot of the boxes that we get our tree seedlings from in the spring end up in a garden that we have outside for suppression of weeds. So it goes back to the ground that way. Let's see. Can you see your message recording? Okay, so thanks for coming. Through the grant, we invite you to take one of those kitchen tabletop stainless steel composters. So that's your reward for sitting here and listening to everybody. Thanks to the folks who came out. We didn't want to make this overbearing and comfortable. So you go over, check it up Yonda Extension and Bill. If you have any questions, and we are going to be at Apianda on the 14th of October. We're doing it in an evening-ish. So we got to nail down the time, but it's going to be around 5:30, 6 o'clock. It's going to be dark. What else are you going to be doing anyway? So if you're interested, please come back. We'll have it available via Zoom again. And any questions or comments on tweaking this would be helpful for us. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you to who are on Zoom. Thanks, Luke, for calling in, and we'll see you later. Nice comments, Stevie. Thank you.